it's going to be fire today because on today's Hoop Dreams podcast, man, we have a man doing some important work in the basketball community. He grew up in New York, played at Iona College, coached high school basketball in Alabama, worked for the Memphis Grizzlies in the community development department, and then, get this, AG, in the year 2015, founded the nonprofit Project Backboard, which is celebrating its 10th year. They've been killing it out there. Its 10th year of operations. And this is what's really special here. This is, when I talk about life stories and basketball stories, AG, they have refurbished over 100 basketball courts across the U.S., Puerto Rico, Canada, Mexico, Japan, Portugal, and of course, they have done the ultimate, the #1 basketball court refurbished anywhere, which is the Hoop Dreams court in our hometown, Chicago, in Garfield Park. But now he currently resides in California, where he still, get this, man, after doing all of that, coaching youth basketball. You're talking about a love for the game? We like to welcome to the Hoop Dreams podcast, the one, the only, Mr. Project Backboard himself, Mr. Dan Peterson. Dan, welcome to the show, man.
I appreciate it. Honored to be on. Love that introduction. I'm gonna have to save that and like frame it.
Man, we are so glad to have you on the show. First of all, before we even get started into everything, man, Agee and I, we just want to thank you, man, for what you did for us in Chicago. The court that was done in Garfield Park, west side of Chicago, man, our home, has not only solidified in our hearts what playground basketball is all about, but what it has also done, man, it has cemented Agee and I, not just from a basketball perspective, but that the Hoop Dreams itself has meant more than what we could have ever imagined. So, Dan, we just want to thank you for that, man, because that has been truly special and like top level, man, in our lives. So thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate it. And, an honor to be a part of the Hoop Dreams legacy and like, Hoop Dreams ideas. That's what public basketball courts are. They're kind of dream spaces, right? It's like that's where you have those dreams where those dreams start. And so like to be connected with Hoop Dreams and everything you guys have done to be able to be a part of the Chicago community that way, just obviously just a special basketball community at large is, an honor. And appreciate you guys for welcoming us into your community and letting us work there. It's, like I said, truly an honor.
Well, Dan, we call this the Agee Engage show, man, but the reality is, man, this is your show today. This is your show, so we want to know about you. We want to know, man, give us your origin story. Like, where did you grow up?
Sure. Yeah. So I grew up in New York, upstate New York, place called Putnam County. So we were literally the last stop on the Metro North Railroad, the commuter rail out of New York City. So close enough to know New York existed, close enough to take the train down to a couple Knicks games. So still felt that that connection there, but also still kind of suburban, kind of rural. But for me, I think I probably like fell in love with basketball probably around 92, 93, probably 10 years old, and those first Knicks teams really with the first iteration of the Ewing Starks teams that were battling with the Bulls. Is kind of like I remember watching them on TV and then running out to the driveway and shooting around, and that kind of planted the seed that grew, to everything that came afterwards. But yeah, grew up, in the kind of a rural community. Grew up playing a lot of basketball by myself. Got to high school. Obviously played for the high school team. Actually, my dad was from New York, so we would, in the summers, we'd go down to Queens and enter into a lot of summer tournaments, playing outdoor basketball in New York, and just fell in love like with playing basketball outdoors.
What was that basketball scene like? I mean, we hear a lot about the New York basketball scene, but you kind of being on the outskirts of that. What was your basketball scene like?
Yeah, I mean, I look forward every year to the end of like the end of the real basketball season, like the end of the school season, so we could, enter into summer tournaments in New York and play outdoors. And, I think even though we were, fairly far from New York, still growing up and thinking about summer basketball as being what happens outdoors and just the idea of official games happening. That's something I think had a big influence on what came later with Project Backboard, moving to Memphis and realizing, oh, there's not tournaments in every city park here. That's not the way every place does basketball. So I think that had a big influence. But I remember as a kid just playing a lot of outdoor basketball. I used to get booted from the hoop outside the high school.
Yes.
Right after midnight, the cops would show up. Be like, "All right, time to go." Sort of being somewhat obsessed with it. But that obsession always manifested outdoors. There was rarely gyms we could get into. And so that sort of idea of basketball is something that happens in the outdoor space was a big part of that experience growing up.
Now you said your dad coached you.
My dad coached, yeah, just youth rec league teams. So up until I think he coached me till seventh grade, and then he wanted us to be exposed to New York City basketball, which is different from upstate New York basketball because the outdoor tournaments and being able to have that experience playing in parks and there being fans in the stands and all the characters that are around the game in a public park setting, right? Because there's no threshold you have to walk through to get into the court. There's no gatekeepers. It's a public park. That was experience, and where I grew up, nobody was creating those experiences for kids other than people like my dad who grew up there and loved basketball like I did.
Now, in your neighborhood where you grew up, obviously you played on the outdoor courts doing your things. Man, I just gotta ask, growing up in your family, are you got siblings? Because I want to know who put the ball in your hand. Like I know you said you fell in love when you were
Yeah.
10 and you was out there on the basketball court, but who put the ball in your hand?
So I'm sure my dad did, but like I'm the third oldest out of eight kids.
Wow.
So I've got an older brother, an older sister, and then I've got four younger brothers and a younger sister. So we got enough for a whole squad. So even though we were growing up in a fairly rural community between all of us, some of us were closer in age than others, but between all of us, there was always something happening on the court in our driveway. So I think my older brother was more into individual sports. And so I was like first in my family to get really um, into basketball in a big way. Um, and then I think a lot of my other siblings, I had a brother, my next younger brother, he played in high school, but for a team that lost in the finals of the state championship, so a good high school player. And then I had two other siblings who played college basketball on some level. So just a lot of basketball in our family. And then now with Project Backboard, one of my brothers is kind of our lead project manager. So basketball and family to me still are very closely related.
I'm loving that. I'm loving that. Now you grew up playing. Now, what was the name of the high school you played at?
Place for Carmel High School.
Carmel High School. How
Yeah.
was who was like before you?
Uh-huh.
That hovers over there.
I'll give you briefly like a little bit of the background to it. So before I was a senior, like I don't think our high school had a winning record in 10 years. I think like we had lost a lot of basketball games. Then the summer before my senior year of high school, they built a new court outside the middle school in our community. That was the court I was talking about. Like I'd be shooting under the security lights. Um, but what happened was that fall of my senior year, we started organizing a player-led pickup on that court every day after school. Um, and we ended up having our best year in like 10 years, and we were 500. We were not a good team. And I was like uh, uh, an okay high school basketball player. I walked on Iona. I was not a Division I point guard, really. I couldn't like defend. I couldn't defend you guys coming out of high school. Let me put it that way. I was not really defending Smush Parker and the guys coming out of New York like that. They were so far advanced of what I was even thinking about, honestly. But then a few years later, my brother's team, 2 years younger than me, his team, they won their section. They like 21-3, and ended up losing in the state finals. And to me, like when I think about Project Backboard, what I do now with the renovated public basketball courts, thinking about the impact that um, court had on our high school's basketball team, right? Going from we were like 12-12, and that was considered the best record in 10 years, to being 21-3, right? 4 years after that court's installed, and probably a half dozen guys want to play different levels of college basketball out of that group. Um, whereas no one had really played. There'd been one guy, a guy named John Ketch, who played Division III basketball that I knew of. That court renovation created a basketball community sort of the first time. That idea of like being able to play against guys like 3 or 5 or 10 years older or younger than you.
Clearly, there was a strong love for the game there. Because I do want you to speak to this, because we have, young folks that listen to the podcast, um, who got hoop dreams, but they hoop dreams, like you said, might not be the traditional way. They may not get the scholarship. They get to walk on. Can you talk a little bit about that experience going to Iona and walking on, and
Yeah.
expectations, things of that nature?
Yeah. So like I said, I was a very average to slightly above average high school basketball player. I played JV as a sophomore. I played varsity as a junior. Probably averaged like 10 to 14 points, 4 to 6 assists, 4 to 6 rebounds. Like I was not killing it in high school. Like I was doing fine. Like I had some 20-point games, but I was not like the man, you know? Um, but the one thing that I had kind of figured out is that I knew how to play basketball with people who were better than me. And so
Interesting.
for me, I was able to, because I was never the man. I always kind of had to be like somebody who could help make people better, right? And so when I got to Iona, and if you're the 12th or 13th man on the bench, no one's looking for you to be the guy who's going to come in and be able to get by their man off the dribble and be the guy to like get a lot of buckets, right? They're looking at the end of the bench is like, are you capable of making the 12 guys ahead of you play better, right? And I see it sometimes with kids now. If your best impact on the court can only happen if you have the ball in your hands, right? I call it being ball activated. If you only have an impact when you're ball activated, your career is going to max out. Whereas if you can do things without the ball and make other people better, your career can max out when you're the like 11th or 12th man on the team. And so I think for kids with those hoop dreams, as someone who had definitely a non-special high school career, you don't have to be necessarily the man to make other people better. And if you can make other people better, your career might last longer than you think. And then two, I've been thinking about basketball now in terms of quarters, right? If I started playing for real when I was 10, right? And I stopped playing for a school team right when I left Iona. At the time, I thought that was my career, right, in basketball. But now I'm realizing, oh, that's just the first quarter, right? Like, so 10 to 20 were quarter one, 20 to 30 was the first half, 30 to 40 is um, third quarter, right? And now I'm 41. My kids are 11 and 12. And I'm saying, okay, 40 to 50, that's fourth quarter. Anything I do on the basketball court after 50 is overtime, right? Obviously it's different from when you're younger and like you have a lot of expectations on what you're supposed to be doing in the game because you put this effort into it or whatnot. But yeah, so now I'm in the fourth quarter and just enjoying basketball in a new way. And I would say for young people too is just be open to the idea that your basketball career is longer than you might think.
I'm actually so glad you said that, because Agee talks about this all the time, having this love for the game. But I think sometimes people misinterpret what he's talking about. Yes, obviously he's saying, hey, you got to be in it your whole heart, go for it. But he's also saying, but if you got a true love for the game, you got a true desire for the game, it's the game as a whole, not just on the court. It's the things you can do off the court. It's the things you can,
Yeah.
like you were saying, you don't always have to have the ball in your hand. You know, it's, you know, accepting, can I make the guys ahead of me better? Like sometimes I think like, I don't know if the average person can do that in life.
Uh-huh.
Can I make this person at my job better at what they do? So, and I think we're supposed to get some of these life lessons in sports. I think sometimes we miss it. But what we want to move into is just, man, we really want to jump into, how did Project Backboard come about?
Just to touch on your last point, like, I think the idea of loving basketball, like, love it not just as a spectator, right? Love it as a participant. And like, that can be playing, right? But it could also be like picking up trash at a court. It can also be changing nets. And I think like figuring out that, love is sort of like when you love something, you got to give something to it. It's not just watching it. And so for young people, you can love games, NBA, you can love basketball, watching basketball, but it's not really love unless you're giving of yourself in some way. And so with Project Backboard, the origin of it was I was working in community relations with the Memphis Grizzlies. And I was working at a time when they had a lot of guys who were really active in the Memphis community. You know, Tony Allen, Zach Randolph, Marcus All, Mike Conley, especially. Um, and so, like, seeing a lot of the give back those guys were doing, and then also, like, when the team wanted to do things like renovate basketball courts, I had always experienced basketball as a player and something that happened like, on a court, right? But being around those guys and in that role, I kind of started to see, oh, it is bigger, right? It's not just what happens when I step onto these lines. And so what I noticed though was in the different places in Memphis I was going to for some of these events with some of the guys, a lot of the public parks didn't have game lines on them. So basically like just playing in someone's driveway. And from someone who grew up practicing my free throws outdoors and playing outdoors all the time, I was like, well, this is crazy. Like, if I'm a kid in the community center's jam, how am I going to actually get better without game lines? So the origin of Project Backboard was in my free time, non-Grizzlies time, I started painting the free throws and the 3-point lines on public park courts that didn't have any of them, thinking about like, when I was 15 and 16 and all the time I was putting in public parks. What happened then was I went to a court that had these shade sculptures next to the court. So I went to the guy who designed the big colorful sculpture, like, hey, what color should the key and the game lines be? And he came up with something funky for the whole surface. A guy named Anthony Lee, an artist in Memphis. And it's like, well, like, all right, like, I guess we'll try that. I asked, right? So it's like, when you ask, you gotta follow through. Um, and it just like totally changed the vibe of the space, and just like the energy was totally different. And it's like, oh, like we should do that again, um, and try to like bring color, see if this works in other places. Again, thinking about Memphis, like being a place where the park life's not the same as New York or Chicago. So like what is going to get people excited to be out in public parks together and maybe be hooping together. And so that was kind of the genesis, was, having an artist kind of come up with the idea and then me seeing it and thinking like, oh, like I got to copy that and see if we can do it elsewhere, and then kind of growing from there. And then, yeah, I don't know if you remember, but we had actually met, I think it's the way we got connected initially before we started talking about Project Backboard. This is before Project Backboard even started. Um, you guys were both at a screening of Hoop Dreams at the Memphis Film Festival, um, and Kevin Cooliow was there with me. We went out to take some photos on a court that I had renovated while I was still with the Grizzlies. And so I think we met from that, and then um, fast forward 9 years, almost 10 years, we finally got Garfield Park done. So the first one that we did that wasn't like my plan was place was the one with Anthony Lee. But I remember the one after that where it's like, oh, we got to do that again. Um, but I didn't know anything. Um, I didn't know anything about art. Didn't know any artists, right? Like my whole life up to that point had been basically basketball. One thing that I didn't learn until later was, you don't have to necessarily close your interests off because you think basketball players aren't artists or artists aren't basketball players. So, but that said, I had to kind of try to figure out who artists might be to work with. And thankfully, there's a guy named Elliot Perry, uh, working for the Memphis Grizzlies, who played in the league and was a big art collector, and had recently had a show of his artworks at the University of Memphis. And so I went to look at the show of artists that Elliot supported or works he owned, and there was an artist from Chicago, a lady named Nina Chanel Abney, who like work just kind of blew me away and was like, oh, like that would look fantastic on a basketball court. It's a lot of like shapes and colors. So I reached out to Nina, and she was gracious enough to come up with an idea for a basketball court with us. And I think that was at Chickasaw Heritage Park in Memphis. I think that was the first court that we did where I actually reached out to the artist in advance with the idea of we should put art on a basketball court. And I think, since and to my knowledge, that's the first time that was done in a public park ever. And since that time, the idea has grown quite a lot, and other groups other than Project Backboard have done it. And, Nina is fantastic, a powerhouse of an artist, just an amazing woman. So we're like kind of lucky, honestly, very lucky to have the opportunity to work with her.
I want to ask you this, Dan, because just in terms of the nuts and bolts behind Project Backboard, because anytime you do non for profit, fundraising and trying to get supporters and people to believe in the dream and the vision, um, how has that been for you guys? Because because I've run foundations, I understand that concept, that component, and the toughest thing has always been is trying to one, get people to believe in what you're doing, no matter how great the cause is. Still got to
Yeah.
get people to believe in it. And then the other thing is, like with everything, now you're looking for folks to volunteer, in a sense, a lot of their time, resources, and things of that nature. How has that been for you guys, especially early on?
Yeah.
You saying you want to refurbish inner city playgrounds?
Yeah, so I started Project Backboard thinking this is just something I was going to do in Memphis, right? Thinking that it's just something I was going to paint all the lines on the basketball courts, and then there was going to be this one court that had Nina's artwork on it, and that was kind of going to be the end of Project Backboard. Um, and we had ended up, so my family, my wife is from the area I'm in now, Southern California, and so both my boys were born in Memphis, and we kind of had an idea that eventually we were going to leave Memphis and go to the West Coast. So initially, I didn't go into it thinking it was going to be something that happened forever. Certainly, it's not something that's going to be happening for 10 years. And when we moved, I was doing Project Backboard, but it was not something I was doing. We were doing 1 or 2 courts a year for the first 2 or 3 years after leaving Memphis. It wasn't like an active thing. It was just something that, like, I loved. I did it because I loved outdoor basketball, and I wanted others to love and experience outdoor basketball. Um, but Yeah, I think we got lucky in like we were doing it sort of at the start of the social media age, and I think the fact that it was visually so big and visually. You guys have been on the court, like the hoop team's court. When you walk into the space, the color is just kind of like it's large, right? It's like you kind of feel the energy and the color in a way, and so I think that was helpful to kind of be doing it in the era where Instagram was sort of taking off and people were excited about things that were visual this way. But so when we started doing it, I didn't have a drone, I didn't have any aerial photos, so it wasn't done for the purpose of social media. It just kind of happened to kind of hit, I think, in the right way. And so the way I talk to people about it now is, look, if you renovate a basketball court, and it looks the same as it did before, it becomes a better place to play, but you're sort of just making it for the existing users. It's going to be the same people hooping on it. It's just they got a better place to hoop now. Whereas if you can switch it up, make it the Hoop Dreams court, and all of a sudden people are excited to come from different parts of the city. You add some extra meaning to it. Maybe people who weren't playing before decide to come out. People from different neighborhoods, like you have an opportunity to kind of change the environment and change the people who use it in a different way. And another unexpected thing that I think helped was I noticed after we did these initial courts that with the color on them, that we were getting more families and more young women coming out
Mm.
using the spaces. And so I think that kind of helped like tell that story and kind of make it seem like something that was um, useful, right? Because people are looking for ways like pu- public parks departments invest tons of money in public parks, like, and then the relative expense of adding a design to the court is not enormous. And so if that's what happens to get more and different users into the park, it can be seen as a pretty good investment. Ultimately, people love basketball and want to be a part of basketball. And I would say half our funds is more traditional nonprofit funds. Half our funding is from corporate partners, everything from sneaker brands to makeup brands. So we've worked with lots of different companies who want to give back, but they want to do it in a way that kind of gets to communities. And the thing about basketball courts, for me, and I think for a lot of people, like if you think about public parks as the heart of the community, like the basketball courts is kind of like the heartbeat, right? So even if you're not playing, you're probably hanging out near the court and you kind of want to see what's happening. And so I think it just touched on a lot of things at the right time that made it something that was bigger than what I expected.
Now, give us the layout for that, because in my mind, I'm thinking like you go to a city, that's a lot of public parks. That's a lot. How do you decide what neighborhood is going to get it, and then you go in that neighborhood, how do you decide where you're going to put it at?
Yeah, so they happen a couple different ways. We work closely with parks departments that help identify areas of need, but we primarily work in public parks. And so working with the government, we need their permission to work. So part of it is where they think it'll work. And then it's trying to connect with community members or people in the basketball world in that city about where is the spots that make the most sense. And we started doing a contest a couple years ago. We're in our third year now. It's called Every Court Has a Story. And so what Every Court Has a Story is we're asking people um, to submit short videos, 60 to 120 seconds, saying why their court is important to their community. And it doesn't have to be fancy videos, doesn't have to be fancy editing. Just tell us why this court's important, why it has meaning that someone who's not from the city might not understand unless they're in it. And so um, the third round video submissions are going live in March. And I encourage anybody like who's got a court in their community that they feel like is important to their community to submit and need some additional love to submit a video. And don't be like intimidated by it being complicated. The simplest videos have won in the past. And so now like we've got a list of when I have a funder interested in renovating the court and they say, hey, we want to renovate a court in Chicago, right? I can say, well, Garfield Park and Arthur Agee and Will Gates, those are the people to talk to if you want to find a court that has the most meaning. And then, and then talk to the Parks Department, say, hey, we talked to Arthur. He thinks this court would be great. They give their approval and then it, moves forward from there.
Have you all done more than one parks in the same city?
We have, yes, we've done in a few different cities, multiple parks. I think like you guys are talking about all these parks is like the good or unfortunate truth is that most cities have a lot of public parks that could use renovation. A lot of public parks are underfunded, and a lot of courts have deferred maintenance. So there's not just one court that needs attention in most places. Um, we've done a couple in New York. New York probably has the most. Atlanta, Chicago, we did the one outdoor court, the Hoop Dreams court. We did an indoor gym in Pilsen a while back, the Union League Boys and Girls Club. Beautiful court with a Chicago artist named Carlos Roland. We try to spread it out, try to get to different communities, but there's some communities where there's just a lot of courts and there's a big basketball. Basketball is meaningful, and so try to bring the dollars to it.